In today's video, I'm going to be showing you two methods to make sure that you're making square cuts at your table saw, whether or not you're using crosscut sled, a sliding table saw with a crosscut fence, a standard miter gauge like this, or even a homemade panel sled. All right, let's get started. Well, all right, everybody, welcome back. Today's video is going to be really cool, informative. I am doing a ton of things in the shop right now, calibrating tools, and I think it's good to get it out there. Just people don't know, and if they're starting out in woodworking, or even if they've been woodworking for a very long time, they tend to forget to do these things, and then they start cutting things, and they're not square. The measurements are the wrong lengths or the wrong widths, and they're wondering why. We need to calibrate things over time. Everything goes out of whack every now and then. You bump into things just get, wear and tear on them. So today we're going to be talking about the 5-cut and the 3-cut method. Those are going to be the two ways I'm going to show you how to square everything up. You very often see people, they make these crosscut sleds. And when you make this sled, you want to make sure that your kerf line or your blade itself is 90 degrees with that back fence. If you don't have it 90 degrees with that back fence, then all your cuts are going to be out of square. So today I'm going to show you a way that we can check that, because with the 5-cut method and the 3-cut method, you're compounding your error. So if your fence is out, either it's too close, it's too acute, or too obtuse to that 90-degree angle like it's supposed to be, then on the 5-cut method, you'll be compounding it 4 times before you make that 5th cut. So by the time you get to that 5th cut, the error is going to be so great that it's going to be very, very noticeable. Now, I have another method, which is the 3-cut method, which is if you're very close and you're just a little bit out, then the 3-cut method is going to be for you. Either way, I'm going to be showing it to you on the miter gauge and the crosscut fence, because this will simulate a panel sled. If you make a panel sled and your fence is towards the back, and this is a regular miter gauge. Even though it's on a sliding table, it's going to simulate a miter gauge that you would have on your table saw if you choose to do it. Or also, this will simulate having the piece up against the back of the fence on your crosscut sled. All right, so let's move in a little bit closer and we'll get started. We're going to start with the miter gauge first, and that's just because most of you have a regular table saw, either a cabinet style saw or a hybrid saw or a contractor's table saw. So this is going to simulate also a crosscut sled. So we'll do the 5-cut method first, then we'll move over to the 3-cut method. And then for those of you who have a slider, you can also follow along with this, but I'm also going to be doing it with the crosscut fence for the people with sliders, and also for the people that have a panel sled. Using anything that's like 12 inches, 10 inches if you're using crosscut sled or a miter gauge, those are good sizes. If you're using the fence on the slider, then 20 to 40 inches is good. The bigger the better on the slider. So we're going to start with this piece right here. So the first cut, I'm going to use the longest piece, because I want that long piece to reference off of the fence. So we're going to mark that number 1. I'm going to try to mark it as clear as possible. This is going to be the first cut. Once I make that cut, slide it past the blade, I'm going to take this and I'm going to rotate it onto the fence, because now I'll have my straight reference. So this cut will be the second cut. Then we're going to rotate it again back to the fence, and then this will be the third cut. Rotate it to the fence, make the 4th cut, rotate it one last time back to 1, and then this is going to be cut number 5, and that's why it's the 5-cut method. Now, if you have any discrepancies here, if you have any error, and the fence is not 90 degrees to the blade, then you're going to compound that error all the way around, and when you get to the 5th cut, it's not going to measure up, and this board's not going to be square. Okay, so here we go. Number 1, we're going to position that so that the saw blade cuts on number 1 first to give us a straight edge to reference. Then you're going to spin the board so that the number 1 cut goes and references against the fence. Now we make the second cut. Second cut's complete, we spin it again. Now the second cut against the fence, we cut the 3rd, spin it so that number 3 is against the fence, cut number 4, then we spin that down, and we're going to make the 5th cut, and then measure everything to see if we got it right. Okay, so now I got my safety gear off, I can talk again, so you can see this was number 1, that's where we cut off, and also number 5, where I marked. My favorite way to check to see if it's square is the cross diagonal. So let's check it from corner to corner. So here I have 20 and 5/8. Spin it here. hook it on the corner, and there I have point to point 20 and 5/8. So this is square, we have no error. So now I'm going to show you the 3-cut method. So what I'm going to do is, I'll stick with number 1 being the long cut. Then I'm going to take the number 1 cut, reference that off the fence. This is where it gets easy. I'm going to make my second cut, number 2. Once I make that cut, I'm going to still reference number 1 off the fence. I'm going to make the cut for number 2, and I'm just going to take it, flip it 180 degrees this way, and I'm going to make a cut, and that's going to be number 3. That's it. This side will be irrelevant.
All right, so cut number 1 to establish our straight edge. We're going to bring number 1 back to the fence, make the second cut, and now we're going to make the second cut, and we're going to keep that number 1 cut referenced on the fence, and the second cut is complete. All you have to do, keeping that same edge against the fence, flip it over 180 degrees, and we're going to cut the third one. Okay, so now moving on to the cross-cut fence on the slider. That's cut number 1. We're going to do the 5-cut method here. So now number 1 goes against the fence. Second cut, rotate it to the left, it goes on the fence. Number 3, rotate it, that goes on the fence. Number 4, now number 4 against the fence, and here is your 5th cut, which is your off cut, and you're going to save this cut because you're going to use this as your reference point to measure and see if you got it right.
Okay guys, so now that the machines are off, I kept the camera rolling because I just want you to see something here. This is the cutoff of the 5th side. So a good way now to check if your cut was actually square is to break this in half. This is the top end that came off there, and this was the back end. Now if you have any discrepancies on the trailing end or the leading end, when you break this in half and you put these together, they're going to be 2 different sizes. Now you can see here, these are not even close to a 32nd of an inch off. Those are dead even. All right, so I'm going to call that good. So the saw is set up good. So now what I'm going to do is I'll do the 3-cut method on here real quick, and then I'm going to throw the fence out about a 1/16 of an inch, and then we're going to do the 5-cut method again, just to show you, to simulate how much of a compound of error it will be, so that you can make your adjustment.
Okay, real quick, 3-cut method on the slider. First cut, spin number 1 to the fence. That's your reference. Make the second cut. Now just flip it 180 degrees, keeping number 1 to the fence, and make your third cut. Break your cut off in half, and double check it.
Instead of messing with my fence and throwing it out of whack, because I have it perfect, I don't want to mess with it at all. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, just about a 1/16 of an inch cutoff that I have, and I'm going to use that to throw the fence out by that amount, by putting it right here at the corner. Now what this is going to do is going to simulate, you can see how much, see how that's throwing it out? And you're going to find this, you know, a little extreme, but this is going to just give you a good idea of how far out. Now we know that this panel is square. So now if my fence was canted in a little bit to, say, not 90 degrees, but this angle would be acute. So maybe this would be 86 degrees, 85 degrees. It's thrown off. So now we're going to run this through 5 times. We're going to compound this error every time. I'm going to keep that piece in there, and every time we turn it, we're going to keep it in there, cut, turn it, move it in, and that's going to compound that same error, and then we're going to measure and see how far off we are. Okay guys, so I let the camera roll just to show you the dramatic effect here that this compounding error has just from this little skinny piece here. So if your fence was off that much, by the time you get to the 5th cut, I mean, look at this off cut. Now you saw before when we were dead on with the 90. Look at this off cut. It's a triangle. So now, if you look at the board, you can see we're almost at a trapezoid. So now, this end is just under 9 inches. Okay, so flip it around. This end is actually 9 and 11/16. Now let's go lengthwise. We have 19 and 7/16. Come to the other side. We have 19 and 3/16. So I don't even need to go diagonally here and do the squaring because there's no point. The compounded error on this method will definitely show you whether or not you are out of square. Okay guys, so really quick, this was a piece that I cut yesterday off camera before I decided to make this video, and it's what prompted me to make the video. Was the saw got knocked out of alignment. I think I banged a whole piece of the plywood into the sliding table, and I kind of, cantilevered it and threw it all off. So this was the piece that the 5th cut off, and I broke it in half so that you can see how these pieces are exactly the same. Now, if I was to put a digital vernier caliper on this thing, you would see there'd probably be absolutely no difference whatsoever. So the way you can check is if you put them side by side like this, then with your eye you can kind of get a visual that they match up. But if you lay them on their side and you put them together from end to end, now this was the front end and this was the back end. So when you break them in half and you flip them over and then you put them on their side and then you put them together and you look at that seam, there is absolutely no height difference in between those two pieces whatsoever. So that's completely flush, and that just tells me that they're exactly the same size. So that's how I know that now my sliding table in relation to my blade and my fence, everything is completely 90 degrees. All right, so really quick, a couple of things before you run out to your shop and go to your saw and say, I'm gonna do these 5 cuts, or I'm gonna do these 3 cuts, then you cut everything and you're like, this guy was wrong. My saw is set up, everything's 90 degrees, my fence to my blade is 90 degrees, I ran it through and my cuts are off. And I recalibrated it and the fence is 90 degrees and you make another cut and it's still off. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, there's a couple of things that you need to do before you go out and do this test. This test is meant for you to just check your cross-cut fence, whether it be on the sliding table or your miter gauge or a cross-cut sled, in relation to the fact that you have already dialed in that your saw blade is first 90 degrees to the table. You have to make sure it's 90 degrees to the table, otherwise you're never going to get a straight cut, so your measurement's not going to be right. That's number one. So check the blade in relation to the table. Once that's 90, then basically, if your miter slot on your table saw, now if you have a standard table saw, then your miter slot has to be parallel to your blade from the front all the way, rotating that same tooth that you choose to measure, rotate that all the way to the back, and all the way through your miter slot has to have no variation to the blade. Now if that's off, if you're not parallel from your miter slot from the front of the blade all the way through to the back of the cut at the back of the blade, then you're never going to get a straight cut, because that means that your trunnion is off that houses the blade and the motor from the cast iron table. If that's any way spun, left or right, then you're automatically going in towards the back of the blade or away from the back of the blade. So you're never going to get a complete straight cut no matter what you do. So what you want to do is, usually there's 4 bolts underneath depending on the table saw that you have. And you loosen 3 of those 4 bolts and you use that 4th one as a pivot. You don't touch that one. Use a combination square. You can use a dial indicator also. Put the dial indicator on a miter gauge and set it into the miter slot. Run it across from front to back of the blade. Make sure that it doesn't give you any variations, and if it does, slightly move your table with those 3 out of the 4 bolts loose and turn it until you're completely parallel. With the combination square, you'll put it in there, put it up against the blade. Once you take that measurement, slide it to the back and make sure that measurement's the same at the back of the blade. This way you know you're passing parallel miter slot to blade, then you can lock everything down. Then, and only then, can you take your crosscut sled, your panel sled, your miter gauge, and make it 90 degrees to the blade to get the cut that you want to produce. Now here's the thing, if you have a sliding table, you don't follow those same rules. Back of the carriage of the sliding table, that miter slot in relation to a certain tooth on the blade, and you pull pull the sliding table carriage all the way back and measure again from your miter slot to the blade, and it has to be close to the same measurement. Some sliding table saws have a naturally set toe out at the end, and what that does is that reduces the amount of drag towards the blade, because if it's not perfectly parallel and it's towed in a little bit too much towards the back of the blade, as you make that cut, what will happen is you'll pass through, and then the back of the cut here will trail in and it will hit the back of the blade, and it'll be taking off more material. So you'll be cutting twice. Once you pass the front of the blade, you'll get to the back and it'll chew off a little bit more, and then your cuts won't be straight. So once you have that set and dialed in, then on the sliding table, you don't set your fence 90 degrees to the blade, you set it 90 degrees to the miter slot or the edge of the sliding table, because that miter slot and sliding table is what's going to be parallel to the teeth of the blade. So if you set the fence to the blade and the sliding table has that toe out that's specified in the manual, then you're not going to be square when you cut because of that toe out situation. Alright guys, so make sure you get those things down. Definitely, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. I hope to see you guys next time. Try to give you guys the best informative videos I can. I'm going to put a link to some of my favorite things that I use for squaring up the table saw, and also some protective equipment. I just got these about 2 weeks ago and I've been using them every day since, and they're really good, and there's a super deal on these right now. I got them on Amazon. They are 2 pairs for $29.95. I was a little skeptical, but I said let me give it a shot because the price is unbeatable and they're really good. These 2 methods are the absolute best way you can find out whether or not your fence is square. If you're building a crosscut sled, a panel sled, or if you have a crosscut fence, or even if you're using a standard miter gauge, or you got yourself a new miter gauge that's aftermarket that doesn't come with your table saw, you're gonna have to set those things up. This is the best way to do it. So I'll see you next time. Don't forget to support the channel. Hit up the Teespring store. I got a new design, all different colors, all sizes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.